When we are deciding on which rope to buy or use, a lot of published numbers can tell us a bit about how the rope is likely to perform, but it's not all as simple to interpret as it looks. Here's the major metrics I look at and why I care about each. Hello, I'm Jason. Durability, hand feel, weight, force absorption, price. There are a lot of things we look for in a dynamic rope, that is, a rope that stretches and therefore is suitable for catching falls while climbing. And like most climbing gear, all these characteristics sometimes run counter to one another. For example, more sheath could mean more abrasion resistance, but it could also mean more weight. Let's walk through these statistics, and maybe a few others, and talk about what they mean to me and how I factor them into my rope purchasing or use decisions. I also want to call out that Hard is Easy did an incredible video, more than half an hour in length, that goes into detail on every test a climbing rope has to pass. I have put a link to that video in this video's description. My video, though, is going to focus on how I interpret these data to help me make purchasing decisions or to help me decide which rope to bring to a particular climb. First, and very briefly, as we could do a whole video on just the pros and cons of each use, there are single, half, and twin rope ratings. In this case, we have one rope that is rated for all three. A single rope is just that, one rope that is used to hold a fall. A half rope is used in a set, clipping only one rope or the other by usually either giving one rope to each side of a wandering route or alternating clipping each rope. A twin rope is also used in a set, but this time we clip both ropes simultaneously through every piece of protection. Sport versus professional is basically performance climbing versus high volume, more burly ropes for things like gyms. Other manufacturers explicitly have a line of ropes, usually more static, dedicated to industrial applications like rope access, and they classify those as professional. Range is just a specific term for this manufacturer, classing ropes based on volume of use and ability to resist exposure to the elements. All right, diameter. Of course, this is how thick the rope is, with single ropes being weighted with 10 kilograms, half ropes with 6 kilograms, and twin ropes with 5 kilograms when measured. I care because it needs to be compatible with other equipment like belay devices, with thicker ropes adding more friction. Not surprisingly, a wider diameter will typically mean more weight. The standard allows for plus or minus 0.2 millimeters though, so our 9.5 millimeter rope could actually be anywhere from 9.3 to 9.7 millimeters. It's just really hard to have manufacturing be less varied than that, so if we are pushing the tolerance of compatible gear, we ought to keep that in mind. Weight can also prove misleading. The weight of a rope is measured by stretching the rope using that 10, 6, or 5 kilogram weight also. Then a meter of that rope is measured while weighted, and then that meter section is taken and weighed. But climbing ropes will return to their non-weighted length after being weighted with small forces. In fact, climbing ropes will typically shrink over time. So that same 1 meter length of rope we took from a stretchy rope will then be shorter than the 1 meter section we took from a less stretchy rope after we remove that 10 kilogram weight. That means that if we were to normalize the grams per meter after letting the rope return to its unstretched length, we get different numbers. In effect, the more stretchy our rope, the more the difference we will have between the actual carrying weight and the tested weight. Also, manufacturers cut their ropes a little long because they do shrink over time, and we never want to think our 60-meter rope that we can just get barely down a pitch with on rappel is going to end up a few meters short. So again, more weight on the carry than we'd otherwise expect. Sheath percentage is the percentage of weight, not diameter, so this can suggest more sheath being better at abrasion resistance. However, it's not because the sheath is thicker necessarily. More likely it has to do with just how tight the sheath weave is. Tighter weaves meaning more material and therefore more weight. But if we want to truly compare sheath percentages across ropes, because it's based on weight, we need to normalize the weight to the relaxed meter first, because again, that's stretchiness variable. Then we could calculate the total weight in sheath. For this triple rated rope, we now see 3 different measures of impact force. This is the force on the gear placement that is holding the fall. For a single rope, that fall is a lead fall around 1.7 fall factor, meaning the fall length from above the gear placement where the fall begins to below the gear placement where the fall ends without rope stretch is around 1.7 times the length of rope we have out between the belay and the lead climber. This fall uses an 80 kilogram weight, or just over 176 pounds, for a single rope. For a half rope, the same fall factor is used, but a 55 kilogram weight is used. The idea being that more variability in the number of falls is needed to test ropes that would consistently fail after about 2 tests with an 80 kilogram weight. It is also resting on the logic that with 2 ropes, the second rope would help catch the fall once the lower gear on the second rope is loaded. With twin ropes, we are back up to 80 kilograms because we now have both ropes helping all the time by design. Obviously, the lower the impact force, the more likely our gear is going to stay in place and hold the fall if we are trad climbing. The number of falls the rope can take before breaking is clearly how many times I can take this relatively horrendous whipper before my rope isn't safe anymore. For singles and twins, think of this test as something like falling from above the first piece with no second piece in and falling past the anchor on a multi-pitch route. And the dynamic elongation is the stretch we get in the rope, lengthening the rope and therefore adding to the total fall length. So I care because a stretchy rope generally will reduce forces on my gear, but a lot of stretch means I could hit terrain features below me, say on ledgy routes. So I don't always want high stretch, say if climbing a blocky sport route where the bolts will hold the force I can apply to them, and lower stretch means less likelihood of my ankles breaking on a ledge below me. And that takes us to static elongation. This is the stretch we get when we add an 80 kilogram weight and we suspend it from an end. This matters in top roping, as more stretch means more retreat from a fall point. This also matters in projecting, as we have a harder time hauling ourselves up. This matters in crevasse rescue or other haul systems. And it matters on rappel if using a tagline. If we have a 60-meter rope that just barely gets us down a rappelled pitch as it stretches to 64 meters, now we need a 64-meter tagline, or the tagline will be 4 meters above us, and we won't be able to use it to pull our rope down. Notice that twin ropes tend to have less elongation and more impact force, even though twins are usually amongst the skinniest of ropes. That's because using them together means we effectively have the thickest amount of rope, contributing to catching the fall. Now, most manufacturers won't publish sheath slippage, so I typically can't pay attention to it even if I wanted to. Bial publishes it because their unicore method of gluing the core to the sheath means that if we get the sheath cut, we won't get the same inability to rely on the rope as core becomes exposed or the sheath frays. Now, there are 2 other things I care about not published here. The first is the water absorption as a percentage of the rope's weight in the dry test. I climb ice, and I want my rope to not absorb water that will then refreeze. The UIAA standard is less than 5%, but anything below 2% is pretty darn good. But again, to compare percentages, we have to do the whole weight conversion calculation as we did with the sheath percentage. The second thing is having a middle mark or a bi-pattern rope that makes finding the middle to set rappels and the like very easy to do. I can mark my own ropes with the right marker that won't corrode material, but I'd prefer to not have to. So I have ropes that are really good for certain things, say alpine missions where weight becomes key, but then I need to manage trade-offs like extra stretch. I also have workhorse ropes that are effective in more situations, but which aren't optimized for specific climbs. Do you have a go-to rope or ropes? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching this video. Please like, subscribe, and share if you want to support us. For more information, you can go to our website at www.shortguysbetaworks.com. Speaking of trade-offs, you can watch a video where we explored specialized versus versatile gear in general, or you can check out our entire gear-related series for more on the equipment to which we entrust our lives. We'll see you next week and keep on getting more out of that big outside.